Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the latest in our webinar series. And the webinars are aimed to help researchers and practitioners share knowledge and experience in natural flood management. Today we've got Angie, Elwin and Chris Short, who are going to talk about integrating local knowledge into NFM work and insights from work they've been doing in lowland catchments as part of the Landwise project. You should all be muted when you join, so the button you can see with the microphone symbol, that should be red. So yeah, and the way we're going to have questions, and we please do contribute, make comments and questions, is if you use the speech bubble option, and you can write in the box there. So you can either write to everyone, or if you wish to write to individuals, then you can do that as well. We will have 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the presentations for questions, and some people, thanks to people who have submitted questions, we'll try and cover those if they're not already covered in the presentation. Yeah, I don't seem to be able to move between my slides for some reason, but it doesn't really matter. I'll carry on. The work we're doing, the Landwise work that Angie and Chris will talk about, is part of the Natural Flood Management Research Programme. And there are 4 projects making up the programme. So there's Landwise, which is looking at lowland catchments in the Thames. There's a Protect NFM project, which there's already been a webinar on which is looking at headwater catchments in the Pennines. And there's also a QNFM project looking at upland catchments in Cumbria. Overall, it's a NERC-funded 4-year, £4 million programme due to finish. The projects are actually finishing at slightly different times, but at the end of next year, so the end of 2021, and we're carrying out novel science to improve the understanding of natural flood management using quantitative and collaborative approaches. And we're looking at a range of NFM measures in different types of catchment flooding scenarios and at different scales. And the aim is to improve evidence and understanding for policymakers and practitioners. So Chris and Angie are going to talk shortly. So Chris is based at the University of Gloucestershire, where he's a reader in environmental governance, and Angie is based at the University of Reading, where she's a postdoctoral researcher. So I'll hand over now to Angie.
Okay, hello everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Yeah. Okay, well thanks Gerard. So my name's Angie Elwin. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in geography, and I'm working on the Landwise project. And so today me and Chris will deliver the webinar on integrating local knowledge into NFM work, insights from lowland catchments in the Landwise project. Okay, so Landwise is, as Gerard mentioned, it's one of 3 4-year NERC-funded projects. Landwise stands for Land Management in Lowland Catchments for Integrated Flood Risk Reduction. So there's a wide range of partners on the project, as you can see here, from a range of different backgrounds, from research and consultancy, policy, farmers, farm advisors, NGOs, flood groups and catchment partnerships, and local flood authorities as well. It's quite a wide-spanning project. And the work that we were doing focuses specifically on the lowland catchments, predominantly groundwater-fed in the West Thames area. And as you can see there, a lot of these catchments, there's 12 catchments in total in the area, and they all have some kind of flood risk. There's three main research questions that Landwise is investigating. Firstly, how effective are different land-based NFM measures at increasing infiltration, evaporative losses and below groundwater storage in different locations across lowland catchments? Second, how does the effectiveness of land-based measures vary seasonally and between years with respect to antecedent conditions, precipitation magnitude and duration? And finally, how effective are land-based measures at delivering catchment-wide water storage and infiltration, thereby reducing runoff rates compared to targeted approaches to reduce downstream flood and drought risk across different catchment scales? So looking at less than 100 up to 8,000 kilometres squared. This is the work packages on the project. So Chris and I working on work package 1, looking at using local knowledge and technical data to create NFM scenarios. Work package 2 is making in-field measurements, and package 3 is estimating from remote sensing data using models. And these 3 packages feed into package 4, running model simulations to test the ideas. And finally, there'll be a web app created to view and interrogate the data. So the webinar will focus on some of the methods that we've been using in work package 1 and how that feeds in to work package 4. Okay, so I'm going to start with talking about some of the methods that we've been using for co-creating landscape scenarios for natural flood management. Okay, so why are we co-creating landscape scenarios? Well, the aim really is to create these NFM scenarios from the co-construction of knowledge, taking more of a bottom-up approach to gather this fine-grained local knowledge, which often complements more of a top-down landscape scale approach. For example, landscape scale models have difficulty incorporating key social and cultural information, such as values and preferences that we know influence land use behaviour. And finally, ultimately, it's owners and managers of land that decide on how it's used, and therefore their values and preferences and views are important. Okay, so we've been running a series of workshops over the past around 8 months, focusing on, we've run 5 workshops, and these on the blue areas here. So one in the Upper Thames, one in the Kennet, Arc, the South Chilterns, including the Pang, and also in the Loddon. The aim has been to create catchment scale scenarios for NFM that reflect the type of measures local communities and organisations want to see. Okay, so as I said, we've run 5 workshops. We've had around 20 or so participants per workshop. In each of the catchment areas, we've split the catchments into around 3 to 5 sub-catchment areas, and people have chosen an area that they feel best represents them because of where they work or where they live and their knowledge on that area. We've had quite a range of people taking part in the workshops, so from landowners and farmers, farm advisors, policy, flood groups, communities at flood risk, NGOs, etc. So the idea was to bring a range of backgrounds, each people with their own knowledge of the area together to discuss NFM. Okay, so during the workshops, we had 2 main tasks, investigating 2 main themes really. So firstly, what types of NFM measures do different groups find culturally or socially acceptable and most feasible in different areas these different catchment areas and why. And secondly, where in the catchment do the local communities and organisations want to see these measures installed or implemented, and why? So from local knowledge, trying to gather information about potential social or cultural or economic factors that may be driving these preferences. Okay, so during the workshop, prior to the workshop, we'd sent information to people on these different NFM measures. So there was 11 NFM measures that we chose. So ranging from different woodland measures to soil and land management, headwater drainage, leaky barriers. So people were already given information about them prior to the workshop. And then once we got into our groups, we had a discussion about people's experiences of different NFM, answering questions. And then individually, people scored each of these measures based on how acceptable and how feasible they believe them to be in the catchment area. So with 1 being least feasible acceptable and 5 being most feasible acceptable. And then each group individual scores were totaled up so that the group came up with a kind of top scoring 3 to 5 NFM measures. Okay, so these just examples from 2 of the workshops that we ran. So in the South Chilterns workshop, there were 3 groups: the Thames Corridor, Hang and Y. And on the top graphs there, you can see this is looking at the proportion of people that allocated a certain score to an NFM measure, with the dark red being the lowest scoring, so least acceptable and feasible, and the dark blue is the most acceptable feasible. So across the different groups, there was quite a range in measures that were preferred. And this is just a summary of 4 of the workshops. The OC workshop was recently done a couple of weeks ago, so it's not included on here, but we've got the 4 other workshops. And within each workshop, there was 3 to 4 subgroups. So in the Upper Thames, you can see Group 1, the top 3 measures included catchment woodlands, river restoration, and floodplain restoration, and so on. And what you can see is soil and land use management, for example, was quite popular across most of these groups, apart from 2. And other measures that were popular included kind of runoff pathway management, leaky barriers, catchment woodlands, and river and floodplain restoration. Okay, so the second part of the workshop, we were asking where in the catchment, based on the favourite or top scoring NFM measures for each group, where would you like to see them being installed within your catchment area? So you can see on the left-hand side there, this is an example of a map that everybody was given, which would represent their own catchment group. This is from the Upper Thames workshop, and one of the catchment areas was the Coal. So we started with the individual task again. And so everyone was given an A4 map, and they stuck sticky dots down, as you can see on the table there, just to indicate where in the catchment they would like to see the top scoring measures. And then they annotated the maps as well, just to give some information about why they would like to see them in these certain areas. So everybody did this individual task initially. And then within each group, they brought together their individual ideas. And on the right here, you can see that's the Coal again, but on a larger A0 map. So all the individuals within that group came together, brought their ideas together, had a discussion around, and came up with a group scenario. And again, they annotated, we had a discussion about why they would like to see these measures in certain places and what were the kind of economic or landscape or cultural reasons for that. Okay, so across the different groups and different catchments, There was some obvious variation in the types of measures people wanted to see. I'm just going to go through some of the comments that were made, because we had a lot of qualitative data based on the discussions, the notes people made, notes explaining their scoring, etc. So in the Upper Thames, for example, soil and land use management was one of the more popular measures, and people commented that it goes hand in hand with good farming practice. Good soil management is economically beneficial to farmers and has positive ecological impacts. So you can see not just the flood risk benefits, but people perceive that there's these other kind of social economic benefits and ecological as well. In the South Chilterns, catchment woodland was one of the more popular. People mentioned that woodland planting in valleys is more acceptable than hill slopes within the area of outstanding natural beauty, considering landscape setting values. So there's information on the cultural values, and also that acceptability depends on how woodland looks and how it can be used by the community. Again, people thinking more about the social benefits of the woodland, and also that opportunities for planting on low quality agricultural land and on clay where production value is low. So again, people thinking about, you know, the maybe economic side effects or outcomes from planting woodlands. And in the Kennet, soil and land use was popular again. People talked a lot about the multiple benefits of soil and land use management. For example, it enhances biodiversity and natural habitat, increases carbon sinks, improves air quality and bird migration routes, enhances soil health and fertility, and does not require dramatic land use change, and that countryside stewardship payments are available. Finally, in the Loddon, leaky barriers was one of the more popular ones. Reduces water velocity and runoff downstream. People mentioned the flood risk benefits, that it's non-intrusive, easy to remove and relatively cheap, enhances wildlife and is aesthetically attractive, and there's opportunities on national trust land where they can be used for teaching about natural processes. So just from those broad statements there, you can see that actually the decisions or preferences are not just based upon perceptions of flood risk management, but these kind of wild, environmental, social and economic factors all play a role as well. Okay, so how are we converting all this qualitative information into something more semi-quantitative that modelers can use? Well, initially we've been looking at the character of the landscape, where different NFM measures were allocated based on those group maps. So for example, if you just go back to the group map, where leaky barriers have been allocated, we've been looking at different landscape characters, such as which types of soil, which geology, what kind of type, topography, land cover, and also thinking about the agricultural land classification. So how useful is that land for agriculture? And we've been creating these tables, real tables, for each of the NFM measures from each group. So this is an example from the Loddon workshop for the Blackwater catchment, which was one of the catchment areas within the Loddon workshop. So in creating these tables, for example, the floodplain woodland allocated on carbonate and mudstone, these different types of soilscapes, flat and gentle slopes, and on low-grade agricultural land. So we've been building up these tables for each NFM measure, just based on the allocation of different NFM measures. And then we've been integrating into the tables the narrative information that we've been collecting from the workshops as well. So based on all of the comments made regarding scoring, discussions around the group maps and from the individual maps and everything. So this is just one example from the Y group in the South Chilterns. So, for example, you can see on soil and land use management, we had comments such as that it's possible on very steep arable land, so more poor quality arable land, on particular soils, so acid, loamy and clay soils with impeded drainage. The catchment woodlands had information such as that they prefer planting on areas of very steep land, which is hard to farm, and that linking existing pockets of woodland at the headwater end is more feasible than brand new woodland. So we've been feeding this narrative information into these raw tables to try and kind of cross-check and refine them. And then what we'll be doing is, so we're using these methods, we'll be constraining the landscape options for these different chosen kind of favoured NFM measures. So based on the landscape character and this narrative information, we can come up with different scenarios for where these different NFM measures could be allocated based on these preferences. And then these scenarios will be used by the modelers, and they can test how effective they are at reducing flooding in these different landscape areas. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of the methods that we're using, and I think Chris will mention the publications that we'll be producing from this information. I can pass to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you very much, Angie. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And so now I'm going to be talking about specifically some of the farmer knowledge involvement that we had. So a specific group that we've involved. Thank you very much for your questions, which have been coming in. I've answered a few of them, and we'll have a chance at the end to go through them. So obviously we're looking at agricultural landscapes, so the involvement of farmers is critical to this. So what I want to do in this talk is just say what we were going to do in Landwise, then what we have found out so far, and then what we plan to do next, and pulling the two together. I will just a slide on the 10 top tips in terms of stakeholder engagement in this area. So what we said we'd do and what we've done over the last 2 years, and I should say here that when I say we, this is the research project team, but very much co-developing this with a group. We had a group of farmers, advisors, and statutory project officers, agency project officers who helped us develop not just the content, but the overall approach. And it's right that I should mention them, not least because one or two of them are on the call. So we wanted to seek the views of farmers across the West Thames, so we developed an online and a hard copy survey response, of which we got 36 responses. We're looking to increase that because actually the information is really good value. We also had interactive stands at Groundswell, which is a soil conservation meeting last year, and we had one beginning of this year at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. And in Work Package 2, we've done soil analysis of 46 farms, and we're going to be in the process of going back to those farms and holdings and most of them and talking, or actually in the current climate, we're doing it over the phone, but we'll have an interview with those farmers to talk about their farming practices and what surprised them or didn't about their soil samples. And as you heard Angie talk about, some of the farmers also were involved in those interactive workshops. So what do we find out? Very briefly, the importance of soils, a wide range of farming practices, which influenced on where we went to soil samples. A very diverse range of views and willingness, and a general willingness to engage. So we must remember farmers are a diverse group. They reflect wider society in a sense, and likewise they have a range of thoughts about how lowland agricultural catchments should be managed to make us more resilient to flood risk. Just to give you an idea, so this is the West Thames again. I think you can see my cursor now. So this is the Upper Thames here, that's the Pang there, and that's the Loddon there. So this is the soilscapes map by Cranfield, and you can see we've got very different soil types across this area. Each of those three catchments has a DEFRA-funded NFM project, and so there was sort of work going on in that area anyway. Again, this just illustrates, so that's this large circle is the soil distribution across that catchment, and each of those three showing the difference that we had. So on our online survey response, we largely reflect that whole survey. So the one circle on the left there is the soils that the farmers said they had, and that gives us an indicative that we're sort of had responses from the right place. So engaging with the farmers here, this is what they told us. So we asked them a series of questions about soil management. Is it worth investing in good soil structure? The vast majority say yes. Why? 58% of them said soil organic matter helps me access my fields more quickly, so earlier in the spring or quicker after a wet spell. Most of them are actively trying to improve their soil organic matter, and they do that every year. Most of them are testing their soils one way or another. Last questions that suggest that this is something which not everyone agrees with. So cover crops are part of my rotation, and that's part of their improving their soil management. So only 28% said yes, and 44% were undecided. We did this survey went out late, so spring of last year. So yeah, after this winter, whether others may have changed in their mind. Soil testing. This is roughly what they said they were testing. So lots of therefore phosphorus, potassium, and soil carbon, nitrogen, trace elements, and many of them they're doing that more than once over a period of 5 years. So it's obviously a regular reference for them. Key area that we need to look at is soil type and rotation. So we just asked them to list their rotation. You can see here winter wheat is a regular cropping up, and in there, but you can see other aspects key. So that interesting that grass lays also seems to feature regularly throughout there, as you can see that maize does as well. So compared to 20 years ago, this is another question that we asked you: what's happened to your yields? Interesting, half people said that they've increased. Equally, close to a fifth said they decreased, a fifth said they'd roughly stayed about the same. Reasons, you'd understand: better seeds, more inputs, better use of manures, varieties, etc. Here, the decrease, issues around waterlogging, black grass, weather changes, or a changing farming system, such as you've gone organic. So we asked them about whether they had unproductive areas on the farm, so unusable or unproductive. Again, 41% said that some of their areas were unproductive. Black grass was a key feature there, but equal numbers said that they had waterlogging or regular flooding, or regularly dry, or they had areas which are now under environmental stewardship, agri-environment schemes. issues of fly tipping, or that they increased machinery size. So these are areas that we would investigate more since we do our more in-depth. I mentioned at the start that their willingness of farmers to change, take on board their advice. So yeah, 64% are considering 6 significant changes in the future, and 61% consider advice very or fairly important within their farm business. Where there was quite a lot of variation, tillage, that is what we mean by cultivations. So just over a third of the sample was conventional tillage, so ploughing, rotivating, etc. 40% are looking to reduce their tillage, so yeah, reduce the number of times they plough, and 24% have taken that to the extreme and have zero tillage. In other words, they don't plough at all. Controlling traffic, so 2/3 of them have taken some actions to reduce the traffic, reduce compaction of their soils. A third hadn't taken any. Again, all of these are sort of current topics, hot topics. So that's the online survey and the results, which were analysis, and we're going to investigate those in more depth when we do the telephone interviews. But just to show that farmers, in a sense, are pretty much in step with other groups and people. These are the graphs at the Groundswell and Oxford Real Farming Conference. So in this instance, what we did was, if you go to a supermarket, you're often given some coins to put in some boxes at the end. So all of those 11 natural flood management boxes present on our stand, and you were given 3 coins, and you had to put a coin in those which you felt was most important. Again, we use the which is feasible and which is acceptable to you. So these are the responses from Groundswell. Now, it's probably not a surprise that soil and land use management came out as the most important, given it's a soil conservation gathering. But the different colours are the light blue here, are farmers, the purple are researchers, and the green is from industry. And you can see that fairly even proportions of both, pulling out to the key ones for soil land use management, runoff pathways to stop soil erosion, and catchment woodlands, along with river restoration. And we did the same at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. So here you had a farm or farmer advisor, an NGO or a charity is the sort of light one, and then the orange is those involved in policy and research. And again, there we go, see a farmer just as likely to soil and land use management, river restoration, catchment woodland. So that gives us an indication, if you like, of involvement there. So we're partway through. So what we're planning to do next, we're going to do these in more in-depth interviews with farmers in the West Thames. We're looking to redo and extend the online survey, because there are other groups and sense that we can get some feedback for. We're looking to pull together an agricultural agri-policy report to input into some of the thinking around elms. We're planning that during April, and all of this will be input into the scenario development with Landwise. So there are other, you can see, other work packages around the soil modelling, the soil sample, etc. Crucially, I think we want to continue the dialogue because we have found the discussions to be so rich and worthwhile, and we're looking for ways in which we can feed back. So certainly the farmers who had the soil sampling, they've received that information and data, so we'll see how they're use or implement that information. But we want to go back to the groups that we've been working with some of this information, so it can feed into decision making. Now, the next few years of the question. So lessons that we've learned from stakeholder engagement. I noticed, I haven't seen the questions recently, but the ones you were asking Angie, this is, I think, quite current. Someone asking was, how do you get to people, to your events, etc.? Obviously, in current circumstances, we wouldn't be holding workshops, but the way we did that, I think, was this use of gatekeepers. So I put them here. I'm trying to see, yeah, invitations via gatekeepers. So rather than have a specific or a new meeting, we'd actually use an existing group or add ourselves on to an existing meeting. People are busy. They don't know us, so we work with people who they do know and trust. So, and if that person says it's a worthwhile exercise, then they're much more likely, in a sense, to come. And all of those 5 have want us to come back. So food and drink really matter. I think that's very important. If you go buy local food or go to a place which supports local produce, then I think that would be that's really, really important. Choose your venue so that the least comfortable, in other words, the people who are going to feel most out of place or most nervous about coming, and choose a venue that's going to suit them. So we ask locally, where would you hold your meetings already for a catchment partnership? And that's a good place to go. When we started at Landwise, we were at the start of our project. Even though we were from university or academics, we're not nervous about asking questions. We weren't going in as the experts. So we were posing far more questions of them because that's what we wanted to learn. This was their chance to have an input and have an say. And very much treat people you invite, they're your partners, they're your research partners in the project. And that's how we've treated farmers, advisors all the way through. We've had some really good feedback about that. Voluntarily, one of the partners said to me, well, this is, I feel involved, I know what's expected of me, and I receive information in return. So I feel like I'm fully involved. You always have the project issue of workshops about some people saying more and some people saying less. So you structure your workshop so there are a range of tasks. So in other words, you can use them to keep people who have a lot to say busy, so they don't say so much. But also it means that you have exercises so that everyone is able to contribute. As you might have picked up when Angie was presenting, there were group tasks and there were individual tasks. Having maps and opportunities to bring photos, etc., is really important. They can be great at the beginning when people may not know everyone or something. There are things to do, things to look at, as well as having the usual coffees, teas, etc. We know that flooding is a sensitive, emotive issue. So sometimes it's right that you just listen, let them get something off their chest. It's not personal, they're just words and something that they need to say. And that can be at the beginning of an exercise, it can come in the middle, or it can come at the end. What you need are enough people around so that someone can just take them away from the exercise and listen and let them say what they need to say. And lastly, regular communication. So we kept in touch with people before and prepared them as to what was happening with information, and very much our aim is to keep in touch with them afterwards. But most of all, workshops are there to enjoy, to relax, and if you're relaxed and enjoying them, then pretty much you find that everyone else is. So I think here we go. So last slide, just to say this is referring. So I think this is recorded and out. So this is an output, so you can refer to this webinar if you wanted to at any point. Publications we're planning here, looking at farmer knowledge and soil. and this issue, the workshops we have co-creating, and this issue of opportunity mapping. So more to come away. So that's a thank you from me. And I can see the questions coming thick and fast now on the top of my screen. So we've got, as planned, 20 minutes to look through these, but I haven't seen them for a while. So Jared, I guess I'll probably hand back to you for that.
Sorry, I was muted there for a moment. Hi, yeah, thanks, Chris. Oops. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, there's quite a lot of questions there. I don't know if, Angie, you've seen any of those that catch your eye.
Yeah.
And there was a couple that I spotted. One was asking about if you were using gatekeepers. Is there a risk perhaps that some groups are excluded from the workshops?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't see. I can see the questions, but only on a tiny portion of the screen. Yeah. So if you could read some of them out, but I have been personally replying to some of them. But the gatekeepers, I guess so. Like we do aim to try and get a range of people from different backgrounds, but I guess there will always be, it'll always be a barrier as to kind of who knows that gatekeeper and, whether they know who they know as well and who they're asking.
I think that's right, Angie. I think one of the things we did do, though, was go through catchment partnerships. So in a sense, it's as a gatekeeper, so that they have already have a partnership. Now, not all partnerships involve everybody, but the whole idea of catchment partnerships is that they pull in the pertinent interests in that area. So, and you try and then have a chat and look across the board. If you think there's someone missing, then you can add that to the partnership. But it's not, the opportunity's there, in a sense. So.
Another question was around the voting boxes graphs that you showed, Chris, from Groundswell and Oxford Real Farming Conference, and asking, I mean, those are both pro-environmental groups, essentially. Would any thoughts on how it might differ with a more sort of broad cross-cut of farmers, more traditional farmers, perhaps another way of putting it?
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think, yes, you're right. What we might do, if we're thinking of going back to the Oxford Real Farming Conference, we could, of course, go to the Oxford Farming Conference as well at the same time and see a comparison there. But actually, there's a lot of discussion around soil at the moment. So and you're finding that much of the thinking doesn't differ really between them. So soils is a really hot topic. We may have a sense the same, we're thinking about the same responses we have too in terms of the online response, that we found a particular type of farmer who was interested in talking about that. But generally farmers are pretty very much getting up to speed on soil and soil management now, different techniques.
Thanks. Angie, you said you'd responded to a couple of questions. Did I understand correctly that you've done that directly to individuals, or?
Yes, yeah. But I've just seen that the responses have been. It's probably more useful to everyone, isn't it? So I can just talk about a couple of them I've responded to. So Peter Tomlin, who asked about whether we're going to be looking at how some of these options, how effective they will be at flood risk reduction. So I've mentioned that this work will feed into the modelling work, and then they will be looking at if these measures are effective at reducing flood risk in different areas, and if so, what proportion is needed to show, a significant or a good kind of improvement in the flood risk management. I think everyone saw the response that Joe said about the opportunity map comparison. I'd also sort of answered that privately as well.
While you're looking, Angie, another question was whether the sites or recommendations that came out of the groups were cross-referred to the Environment Agency's recommended proposed NFM locations. Were the EA involved in these, or was that done at all?
Yeah, that was the opportunity mapping. So this is something that we will be discussing in our publication, just comparing. I think Joe might have written a response to everyone. I'm finding it quite hard to follow these responses because they keep flicking on my screen. I'm not sure if everyone's getting that problem, but when I stop reading, it disappears. So sorry, not very helpful there. It's something that we'll be looking at, but obviously it's what we're doing is based on local preferences, local knowledge, so it's quite a different approach. Certainly something that we have thought about.
Chris, were there any other questions you spotted that you'd?
Yeah, so Ian's asked a number of questions here about so frequently of grassland renewal and techniques used for that, issues around soil testing. So those are exactly the things that we'll explore in the now telephone discussion. With an online survey, you've got a very limited chance to sort of engage on that, but that's exactly the sort of areas that we wanted to dig around a bit deeper. And I see you've made mention of Horizon 2020. Maybe that was someone else. So yeah, so very happy to engage with that and other projects doing similar issues.
There was a question asked about the responsibility for long-term maintenance, management, and liability. Was that those issues considered in any way?
I haven't seen, but recently I had a discussion about that. In a sense, I think this comes back to the heart of what natural flood management is. There's much discussion about how do you define. An interesting one came up actually, that natural flood management is something that should have almost no risk and almost need no maintenance, or that maintenance which is undertaken as a part of normal practice. So if you think of soil and land use management, then most cases you could see what you're looking to do would be to reduce risk, reduce soil erosion, for example, surface runoff. So you're reducing risk, and your maintenance is part of everyday structures. If you go to, say, leaky areas, then obviously visually you think have different impacts of what they are, but they're not. Engineering. I've seen some natural flood management barriers which are sort of 1.5 meters high, and they're basically engineering with wood. They clearly have risks and they clearly have liability. And in my head, they're not natural flood management. So this is a key area and something that needs to be bottomed out, and there are a lot of discussion going on about that, because basically you can't say that there is no risk. But intuitively, that's what some people want to say. So this is important, and I understand that it's going to be there's going to be something coming out on it soon. But I'm hoping that it will come out with actually natural flood management, which is all part of nature-based solution, building up the resilience of the natural environment to provide benefits, will show that actually maintenance is fairly minimal, not minimal, and risk is small, or very low. And if either of those two things don't work, it's not really natural flood management.
One of the questions that was submitted before was it was specifically asked about drought, but I guess it more broadly, were there other themes or issues that were brought up in the workshops outside natural flood management that you could comment on?
Sorry, Joe, was that for me or for Angie?
Well, either of you.
I wasn't concentrating. I was looking at another one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it just somebody asked if drought came up at all at the in the work, and I wondered if maybe there were other issues. If indeed
it's definitely
that was
a factor, because I didn't say in the introduction, I'm chair of the Upper Thames Catchment Partnership, and drought is definitely a factor in the top of the Upper Thames, which is effectively the headwaters of the River Thames. So much of that area, there are no few watercourses. So yeah, it's definitely there. You've got very thin soils, Cotswold brash, and they'll be digging around in their memory. But if you're looking at the summer of 2018, there was very much an issue there. And in fact, one of the farmers we've been working with has got herbal lays. His neighbour, many of his neighbours noticed that his soils were, or his grass was much lush and green compared to their rather parched and brown perennial ryegrass fields. So it has come up. Probably not so much now.
Okay. Go on, Angie. Did I
just going
you were going to say something? Yeah.
It is something investigated in the broader research questions of Landwise as well. So not just flood risk, but also thinking about drought as well.
Do shout out if there's questions you'd like to answer. But there's a question about the measures that were proposed at the workshops and the extent to which they were, and the words used in the question, were plausible within the given landscapes. I guess whether they're technically feasible is in a way the question.
That's something also we'll be looking at when we refine these rule tables. So, there's probably not much use having headwater drainage management in the floodplain, for example. So we'll be thinking about, suitability in terms of that as well. Whether these NFMs that have been allocated to certain parts of the catchment, whether that's something that, is suitable. Yeah, so it's definitely something we've been thinking about.
Okay, any other questions you'd like to answer? I'm just scrolling through. There's a lot of interesting comments as well as questions. And just to reiterate, the presentation, the webinar will be available on our website. So both the slides and there'll be a recording of the webinar.
Yeah, there's a couple of bits on woodland which I think I picked up. So I think when we talked about woodlands in these workshops, actually quite a bit of the discussion was about management of the woodland that we already have, as well as the creation of woodland. So, and actually hedges was noted that they didn't explicitly appear on our 11, but you know, a crossfield woodland could basically be a hedge. So there's clearly a reluctance amongst farmers to lose, or they, in their mind, lose land to woodland because they lose it in the long term. So, as someone's commented, that nudges them to think about soil management rather than moving towards woodland. But certainly, if you look at woodland in terms of field corners or wide hedges, then those were clearly things that they were talking about. There's a bit of a buzz around agroforestry, so looking at trees within the landscape in a very different way. So I think movement is, yeah, things are heading towards that. But many people who manage land, if you say woodland, and they look at blocks of trees, that suggests them a loss of large chunks of land.
Okay, yeah. Any other points you'd like to pick up?
Yeah, I was just looking at the questions which were sent in ahead. Someone asked about local priorities and values incorporated in decision making. Well, hopefully, Angie's discussion of our workshop process was outlined that. Voluntary participation from landowners, we've certainly found landowners very forthcoming and wanting to get it involved. So methods for landowner participation without financial incentives such as countryside stewardship. Where, interesting, a number of the workshops where there's what's required is small, low cost, and doesn't influence on main activity, then many landowners are willing to play their part if they can see that they're contributing to reducing flood risk in a community, then they can do so in a low intrusive way than they are doing that, and that can be outside of countryside stewardship. We of course are looking at new schemes, and they may well broaden out to include those sorts of things. I think those are the main ones that I picked up. Oh, yeah, catchment scale approach to NFM. I think this is a critical one for the future. In our discussions, you look at it that natural flow management is a very small part of large catchments, and if that remains the case, then it's going to have very little impact. So you need a much larger area in your catchments to be involved in some contributing to natural flow management in order to make any sort of difference. Scale.
Okay, well, I think we've pretty much run out of time. Is there anything you would do differently as a result of, if you were going to go through the exercise again? Was there anything you'd do differently?
Very good question, Jared. I think we found that the length was right, the timing was good. Sure, I would do anything differently. The speed was right, and I think the important thing is to keep that communication and go back.
The food is important, definitely. Which we seem to get that quite right, didn't we, with the bacon butties and local cakes and things. So that was definitely
started on the right foot.
Yeah, we keep people happy with food. They're happy to share their
good food. It's not a supermarket sweep. You look as if you put in some effort. They recognise where it comes from. And that means a lot.
Speaking of which, it's probably quite a few people's lunchtime now. Well, thanks very much, Angie and Chris. Would it be okay if we to offer to go through the questions that have been asked and just answer any that we haven't picked up, because there's quite a lot there, and the chat isn't the easiest way to read it. Yeah. Great, thanks. So just to close, thanks very much for joining in the lively discussion we've had. If you have got any feedback or follow-up questions, please do email us. You can find out the email on our NFM website. Well, it's nfm@reading.ac.uk. That's nfm@reading.ac.uk, and you've got Angie and Chris's emails there. As I said, the recording will be available on our website, and we'll make the presentation available there as well. The next webinar is on the 19th of April, and it's Dr. Lydia Burgess-Gamble from the Environment Agency. Who'll be talking about working with natural processes, the evidence behind NFM. So if you're signed up to our newsletter, you'll get a notification to allow you to sign up to that webinar. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for that one too. Other webinars are also lining up. We're getting a full program over the next 2 years, and that's filling up, so you can see what's coming up on the website. So yeah, thanks very much, and I hope you'll join us again soon. So, bye.
Bye.
Bye.